You're listening to the Arizona Society of CPAs podcast.
Once again, John Baumer, the Director of Government Relations for the Arizona Society of CPAs, with my trusted co-host, Ryan Dimena Public Affairs, long-time lobbyist for the CPA profession in Arizona. And our guest today is Representative Marcelino Quiñonez from Legislative District 11, which encompasses South Phoenix and Laveen. Representative Quiñonez is a first-generation college graduate and has dedicated his career to providing opportunity to the community through his various servant leadership roles. He taught in South Phoenix and was later elected to serve on the Roosevelt Elementary School Board. And he served as a nonprofit leader at the St. Vincent de Paul charity and was the director of educational outreach and partnerships at Arizona State University prior to serving in the legislature. He's passionate about education, the economy, and engaging voters to ensure a strong democracy. In addition to being the minority whip for the Arizona House Democratic Caucus, Representative Quiñonez serves on the Appropriations, Ways and Means, Transportation and Infrastructure, and Military Affairs and Public Safety Committees. It's a lot of work for you, sir.
I have a full plate. Let's just put it that way. My two committees are ranking in Military Affairs and Public Safety, and also I serve on Appropriations. Sometimes, given my leadership role, a member is not able to attend or whatnot, and so that's when I will fill in, as you mentioned, in Transportation this year, and then in Ways and Means.
Very good. Well, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. We know you have a lot going on, so we'll get right into it. If you could share with us, you're a member of the Democratic leadership team in the House. This has been an unprecedented session in a lot of ways. It's a new dynamic. We have a Democratic governor for the first time in almost 2 decades. Can you share with us some of the challenges that you've experienced as a leader this session, and then some of the successes that your caucus has had as well?
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think what's happened over the last 15 weeks here at the Capitol is there's been a newfound understanding of exactly what you mentioned, which is the dynamics here at the Capitol are different for the first time in 15 years. So we no longer have the 31-16-1 path that we've seen over the last 15 years for a number of bills. This means that there has to be greater engagement, greater dialogue, greater conversation in order to get to a consensus that benefits all of Arizona. I think with that in mind, that encompasses a lot of growing pains. When you're accustomed to something and then all of a sudden there are 63 vetoes to remind you that path is not there anymore. I think it means that there has to be greater collaboration. And I think we've seen that in both chambers. You've seen a number of individuals from both sides of the aisle engaging with each other on the floor. And as Mr. Dimena will tell you, if you walk the hallways, you'll see people engaging with each other, having conversations to add amendments, to add language to any proposals so that it's got greater bipartisan support.
I just got to double down. I love what you said too. 63 vetoes. It's not a subtle reminder that the political landscape has changed dramatically. So ultimately, slowly but surely, they'll get that message. And I think to your point, Representative Quiñonez, they're starting to.
Well, I think it's a learning opportunity for all of us, right? It's an opportunity for everybody to sort of take a step back, take an accurate assessment of the landscape, and then to begin to identify opportunities. I think you asked about some of the challenges. Some of the challenges have been that the majority respectfully has been so cautious in giving the governor any sort of victory. And so as a result, a number of our Democrat bills will get out of committee, but then fail to show up in rules. Or you have a few, about 5, that are actually able to make it through both chambers and then receive the governor's signature. That is something that needs to drastically improve. I think we need to look at the policy, and I think we need to look at how it's going to benefit people and then act accordingly, as opposed to sort of taking political the account of the points and where those are at. I'll give you a perfect example of what I'm describing. I introduced a first-generation homebuyer program this year in the Capitol. And the reason for that bill is because housing is in a severe crisis in all of Arizona, and we all hear about it. my approach is always to look at what's available, to identify the collaboration, and then to unite the programs and to work collaboratively. So I did work with Chairman Livingston from the majority in appropriations to get that bill through appropriations, working with counties and cities and then individuals so that they could obtain their first home. And as I was needing to get it through the rules, I had a number of conversations with my friends on the other side, and this is what I heard. This is a really noble cause, but my concern with this noble cause is that it'll give you too many points. And so all you can do is laugh at that, right? And you sort of take a step back, but that gives you a sense of sort of what the dynamics are like down here.
I will tell you, it's so interesting to hear you say that too, because when people ask sort of, what do you do for a living? And we finally drill down to the fact that I'm a lobbyist running around the state capitol. And then I like to very quickly say, and you know what? I love policy, but I hate politics. And then they kind of look at you cross-eyed going, well, what are you doing down at the state capitol? But to your point, Representative Quiñonez, it's always, I don't think this will ever go away, but that it is so frustrating when a bill doesn't advance on its merits, when politics enters the picture and there's something impacting that legislation other than the words on the page. What an extraordinarily frustrating thing.
Mr. DeMena, if I could comment on that just momentarily. Folks have asked me, what are your priorities? Why are you down there? And I've often shared that life has been very kind to me through a number of programs, through a number of initiatives. Life has been made easier for me. And so I'm committed to making sure that happens for others in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of housing, really addressing the issues that impact everyday Arizonans, really looking at policy that will make things better for people. But in addition to that, my demeanor down here, I will joke and I will make those jokes of, 1631-1, and that's not the case. And the vetoes, I will make those jokes because I think it adds to it. But I will never turn full antagonistic in terms of saying, because I think the decorum that we are asked to exhibit is really important for the public to see, because if that is demonstrated and that's what people pay attention to, then I think they're more likely to engage with their neighbors who might have a different candidate in their front yard, and they might actually begin to engage in dialogue. So I think really highly of every member that is down here, and I do my best to convey that to every single one of them. It's clear that we're not going to agree on policy on everything. That is clear. But if we focus on those other issues where we can create some consensus and some collaboration, I think ultimately that does everybody well.
Absolutely. John's heard me say this repeatedly. The name of the game at the Arizona State Capitol and policymaking process is compartmentalization. If we focus on the 5%, 10% of things that we vehemently disagree on, then we're not going to get to work together on the other 90% of those issues that we totally agree on. And now John, in his introduction of you, used a term that I want to revisit, and I want to talk a little bit about your path to where you are now. Sure. Servant leadership. And it really is something that I think describes your approach to serving your members, to serving your constituents. It really is emblematic of really, as I've come to know you better, it is a great descriptor. We've talked with Bomber, Representative Tarek, Representative Bravo, and others and take this the way it's intended, my friend, as more traditional freshman lawmakers. And I think it's been interesting for the CPA audience to hear, once you've gone through an election, what does it take to get familiar with the process and be ready to sort of hit the ground running come January? Your case, and we've talked about this, you, my friend, were what we call a transfer student, right? You were appointed to this role, which means that you didn't have those few extra weeks and that extra, month or two to really kind of gear up and get ready to serve in the role that you're in. So you, more so than anyone, whatever metaphor you want to use, had to hit the ground running. We're thrown right into the deep end. Then there's a follow-on to that. Not only did your constituents feel that they wanted to send you right back to the legislature, you were successfully reelected as you sit before us now, but your caucus determined that they needed to elect you to a leadership role. So again, respectfully, a transfer student who you are for all, we say freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, whichever of your two terms you're in. You are a sophomore who as a freshman was a transfer student, and you're now in a leadership role. So I just, can you kind of speak to that?
I thank you for saying that out loud. Last year, as a transfer student, I was really fortunate to have incredible members who mentored me and guided me. And then, in addition to the members here, I have an extraordinary support system outside of this place with individuals that I can call and talk to. I've long been a student of this arena. And anybody who's been into my office, they'll see three portraits here. They'll see a portrait of President Lincoln. They'll see a portrait of President Kennedy, and then they'll see a portrait of President Obama. And the reason why these three individuals are here is because, to me, they all exhibit patience. They exhibit the idea of a new frontier. They exhibit the idea of hope and collaboration. And so I've done my best to replicate those lessons that I've read in those books in my own experience. But I think the most important thing that one has to understand is that leadership is really about listening. I think a lot of times we think that as a leader, and it's ironic that I'm saying this as I'm talking, but I think, we think, oh, as leaders, I have to always charge the conversation and always be the outspoken one. And then you come to realize that ultimately leadership is about listening to try to understand where people are at. And then in listening to that, you begin to develop bridges and you begin to make introductions. I think what it means to be in leadership is, yes, an extraordinary amount of responsibility. There are decisions that have to get made every single day on a variety of issues. But beyond that, what being in leadership also means is that you have an extraordinary amount of information. And with that information, it's then determining how you can align ideas, projects, initiatives, desires, and then get them rolling. And then lastly, I think what's important is perspective. A lot of times we sort of try to run the marathon immediately as soon as we start running, and that's great. But then if you do that, you really lose sight of everything that's around you, and you lose sight of everything that you're approaching. And so for me, I think it has to do with, like President Lincoln. I mean, in our country's most turbulent years, he demonstrated an extraordinary amount of patience to sort of assess everything that was going on, promote individuals that could then lead the charge, and then showed an extraordinary amount of patience with individuals from his own caucus who were not doing everything that they were supposed to be doing, and nonetheless gave them that grace. And so I think that is sort of what guides the work, and hopefully what will permit me to continue to be of service.
Moving to a little more close to home, we're, I think, 17 days past the 100-day deadline, which is arguably the historic milepost to at least begin wrapping up session. This week there was a lot and not so much that happened. You're all very busy with trying to figure out, state budget and where we're at. But can you give us a sense of what you think the future holds for this legislative session, how long we're going to be in, and what might be next?
Sure. So I will tell you this. We have had 3 days of session the last 3 weeks, but we've had 1 day every week. But I can tell you that some of us have not had any break. I can tell you that some of us have been on the phone. I can tell you that some of us have been in countless meetings. And so while we've only had 3 days of official session, there's been a lot of work to try to get us to the finish line. And there's been a lot of conversations. There's been a lot of engagement with the governor's office and the majority. And then, of course, there's been a lot of engagement with the governor and with her Democratic caucus leadership. So things are moving. I think the best way to answer this is going right back to your first question, which is we're in a new dynamic, and what does that mean? And so arguably our most important task as legislators is to pass a budget. And so in passing that budget, all of those dynamics that we discussed earlier in terms of the majority and having a different party in the executive tower, all of that is coming into play. The other thing that I think is important for us to keep in mind is that in many ways, we are going through a repetition of my transfer year, right, Mr. De Mena? Last year, there could have easily have been a 31-16-1 budget. That could have been done. There was a historic $5 billion surplus. And ultimately, I think cooler heads prevailed last year in the sense of, well, we have this incredible surplus, and if you look around, there's an incredible need, and so we really need to utilize this revenue to sort of create some equity and some balance. As a result of that maturity, rather than leaving with the 31-16-1 budget in April or even May, we ended up staying until June, because multiple voices had to get involved. And as a result, for the first time in a long time, last year we passed a historic bipartisan budget. I foresee the exact same thing. I can't give you a specific date, but I can tell you that I think that's ultimately the direction that we're headed in.
I joked last year, Representative Quiñonez, that we had spotted a unicorn at the state capitol, and that unicorn was a bipartisan budget. But hoping to see another unicorn this year. And I'd agree with you that we always like to say the solution to the riddle is in the middle. Nothing's come together to make this happen, and we saw that. That was a good budget. So
I love that. The solution to the riddle is in the middle.
It's a good one, Ryan. Yeah. And of course, going back to the new dynamic that's down there at the Capitol, presumably the unicorn won't be so rare for the next 3 to 4 years, at least 4 years going forward. I'm assuming Governor Hobbs is going to want Democratic priorities and Democratic members on subsequent budgets.
There's a lot of work to be done. I like to call that work community work. So there's a lot of work to do in the community so that we can give Governor Hobbs the majority that she needs so that she can fully implement her vision for Arizona. Because again, when the game is looking at the political points and not really the policy, that decreases its effectiveness. And so we need to give the governor a majority in both chambers.
And I'd add to that, Representative Quiñonez, what a big moment for Arizona government as well. Because I think, and John and Representative Quiñonez, curious what you think, but up to this point, there are a lot of bills that go with that 16 and 31, just a purely partisan approach. And now that's being done for a number of different reasons that we don't need to go into, for purposes of this discussion. But in this new political dynamic, there's been a lot of what I would call sort of nibbling around the policy-making edges. These sort of major policy, the heavy lifts in the policy-making realm aren't being done because you don't really know who those bipartisan coalitions are just yet. But when the budget gets rolled out, when that process is underway, and it is hopefully, as we've said, the unicorn becomes more of a permanent fixture at the Capitol, that's sort of that sign to those who are watching the process regularly like we do to say, that's the group. Back to my earlier comment, the solution to the riddle is in the middle. Those are the folks who are talking in the middle that we can turn to do some of these larger policy making, the heavy lifts. No more nibbling around the edges.
Exactly. And I think infrastructure is a perfect example of that solution to the riddle being in the middle. Our roads, our buildings, our workers, they don't care if it's passed by the majority or the Democrats. What they want is they want their roads to be improved. They want to have a safe way to get to and from a place. And so I think infrastructure is a wonderful sort of policy issue where it's right in the middle and it benefits everyone.
If we can keep on, the new dynamic that we're in, last week was a pretty historic one. The governor, as Ryan mentioned earlier, has vetoed an historic number of bills. That's not a secret, and we all know why that has to be done. To Ryan's point, 16 and 31. There's been a number of bills that have passed out with that margin. We can be honest and say, full awareness that they were going to get vetoed. But one of those was the cottage food industry bill, which had a lot of bipartisan support.
2509.
2509. And so in the previous administration under Governor Ducey, there were plenty of vetoes as well. I think he hovered around 20 or so on average every year, Ryan, and Governor Brewer before him. There never really was an attempt to override a veto, but last week the House did try. So that's pretty historic. And as someone who was in the midst of all that, I was wondering if you could give us some insights as to what went down and how that played out down at the House.
Sure. So we talk about policy and we talk about the politics, and we have to focus on the policy. And last week, in many ways, was an attempt to send a message to the governor that her veto could be overwritten. Ultimately, that has not happened in Arizona since 1981. So we're looking at over 40 years since the last governor was veto overridden. The governor expressed some policy items that needed to be addressed with 2509. The governor's team reached out to the bill sponsor and requested these modifications to be made. Last year, arguably the most significant piece of legislation to come out of this chamber was the ESA expansion, which over the next 10 years is going to cost Arizona $1.5 billion with a B, $1.5 billion. That was a late introduction bill. Yeah. It sped the process, and then it was passed, and now it's going to cost Arizona $1.5 billion. The cottage food bill was an opportunity, again, to take into account the governor's thoughts on the bill and then address them. Because one of the issues has to do with the deregulation and ultimately what that can lead to. We've seen it with short-term rentals. We've seen it with Airbnb spaces where the deregulation decreased to such a point that now individuals who are taking advantage of that opportunity of those programs can't do that, because all of these spaces have been bought out, and all of a sudden everyday Arizonans can't take advantage of that program. And so to go back, the governor expressed some ideas within the bill that needed to be addressed. The governor reached out to the bill sponsor, requested those conversations and those modifications. And as a caucus, we expressed, if the issue is really about the policy, then let's work on it and let's bring it back as a late introduction. Because again, we saw this just last year on a piece of policy that is going to impact us drastically over the next 10 years. And so it was an opportunity to really adhere to what we believe is good governance and what we believe is the way to go forward.
And Representative Quiñonez, I got to double down on that, because to me, even going back to the governor's veto message, there are two types of veto letters, in my opinion. One, which is, I vetoed this and there's no way I'll sign anything that even resembles it in the future. The other is a veto message that serves effectively as a roadmap for how the legislature can tweak the bill so that it is something that the governor will sign. It was very much the latter in this case. But just to pause on this as well, what an extraordinary legislative career you have had to date. If you think about the fact, transfer student, that following year, historic bipartisan budget, you come in as a member of leadership, and then during this legislative session, which we're not even done with yet, we've already had an expulsion. There's been a near veto override. I mean, just what a roller coaster ride as an elected official, my friend. I just had to point that out.
Thank you, Mr. DeMena. I'm an artist, as I think is pretty well known. I've written a couple of plays, and I've performed, and I've directed, and I teach theater at the community college level. And so Hamilton is, of course, one of my favorites, and Lin-Manuel Miranda. And there's that song that says, "History has its eyes on you." And so as you were saying that song just came to mind. No, it's been an incredible journey thus far, and one that I hope to continue with humility, with thoughtfulness, and with service.
Well, we're almost wrapping up here. So Ryan, Representative Quiñonez, do you have any final thoughts for this webinar, the legislative session, and all things Arizona politics that you want to share?
I'll start off by just thanking all of the CPAs who are here for tuning in and for listening to this conversation. Really appreciate it. I hope it gives you an insight as to what's taking place at the Capitol, but beyond that, what's possible here at the Capitol. Additionally, I really appreciate all of the work that CPAs do in Arizona for our private industry, for our non-for-profits, for our schools. The work that you do to ensure that all of the numbers add up is incredible. The work that you all do to figure out how the numbers can be implemented makes things possible. And so I want to thank you for your extraordinary, keen attention to detail. I want to encourage you to keep going, and anything that I can do as a representative, as a member of this body, let Mr. DeMena know, and his group will let us know, and we will do our best to ensure that we are passing policy that is of support to our CPAs.
That's excellent. We appreciate that, Representative Quiñonez. It's great to hear.
Yeah, I would just kind of double down on what Representative Quiñonez said. Obviously, such an appreciation for our CPAs and what an amazing, association. John, you and Oliver just doing such an excellent job. It really is a leader in advocacy down at the legislature. And I would say as well, Representative Quiñonez, what you, Minority Leader Cano, others have done, this new dynamic at the legislature, there's something that I need to point out, which is that I don't think that you necessarily ran for re-election on a platform of getting, income tax conformity passed as early in the session as possible. These are not the big ticket items that drive out, voters. But I will tell you that when it comes to the policymaking process, these sort of grist of the mill issues that need to be addressed, your team came in and hit the ground running. And I think that you can see that in the form of, for example, conformity being done historically early when compared with previous legislative sessions. I think, John, right? We were the second bill signed into law this legislative session. Having conformity on the books gives CPAs and taxpayers the surety they need to prepare their state level tax returns. When it's passed in May and even later in the past, they're left with all this guesswork, and then you've got amended returns. And anyway, so I just want to double down and say, I appreciate you all hunkering down and focusing on even the issues that voters don't view as sexy. But the last thing I would say as well is that there's that famous, Goldwater quote about you can disagree without being disagreeable. But I just got to tell you that, Representative Quiñonez, you're an absolute joy to work with. I wish we had more like you down there, and I look forward to continuing our work together.
Same here, Mr. DeMena, and appreciate all of that. I will take the slightest moment to say that I think Leader Cano has done an incredible job of demonstrating leadership, and then also additionally making sure that our caucus doesn't always is not always seen as like anti-business, but if anything, the Democratic caucus is open for business. We are open to working with stakeholders and different entities to ensure that, again, we are creating an Arizona that works for everyone, because ultimately it has to do with revenue, and if the state is not acquiring revenue, we're not going to be able to enjoy those surpluses and then make decisions on a budget with the surplus. So I appreciate what Leader Cano has done for all of us, and I hope that everybody tuning in understands that the Democratic caucus is open for business.
Well, that's time. So thank you, Representative Quiñonez. We greatly appreciate you taking the morning to speak with us. And Ryan, it's always great to have you with us. We look forward to next week and what the session has in store.
This episode of the ASCPA Podcast originally aired as part of the Legislative Scoop webinar series. To learn more about the Arizona Society of CPAs advocacy efforts, visit ascpa.com/advocacy or learn more in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and review.